The conference room at Patterson and Associates law firm felt smaller than it should have been, even with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. I sat at the polished mahogany table with my hands folded in my lap, my late husband's wedding ring still warm on the chain around my neck. Across from me, my son Derek shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit while his wife Madison leaned back in her chair with that familiar smirk playing at her lips. "Mrs. Chen, we can begin whenever you're ready," Attorney Patterson said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents spread before him. Madison's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the armrest. "Can we speed this up? Derek and I have a contractor meeting at 3. We need to discuss the renovations for the main house." She emphasized main house like she was already planning the furniture placement. I said nothing. Just looked at her with the same calm expression I'd worn for the past 3 months, ever since the day she threw my belongings into the yard like garbage. The day she told me my time in her house was over. Derek finally spoke, his voice carrying that apologetic tone he'd perfected over the years. "Mom, Madison just means we should handle Dad's estate efficiently. You know, get everything settled so we can all move forward." "Move forward," I repeated softly, the words tasting bitter. "Yes, that's what your father would have wanted." Madison's eyes gleamed. She thought she'd won. She thought the frail old widow sitting across from her had finally accepted defeat, accepted that she'd be packed off to some assisted living facility while Madison claimed the house Richard and I had built together over 37 years of marriage. Attorney Patterson cleared his throat and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we proceed with the estate discussion, Mrs. Chen has asked me to present some additional documentation. Derek, Madison, I think you should both pay very close attention to what I'm about to share." I watched Madison's face, that perfectly contoured, confident face that had sneered at me while my vintage sewing machine lay broken in the wet grass. That face that had called my mother's jade bracelet cheap costume jewelry before tossing it into a donation box. What additional documentation? Madison's voice had an edge now, suspicion creeping in. "Derek and I already reviewed everything. The house is in Derek's name from the trust Richard set up. We've been very patient with Grace's transition period." "Transition," I said again, that single word hanging in the air. "Yes, you've been very clear about your expectations for my transition." Derek looked between his wife and me, confusion clouding his face. "Mom, what's going on?" Attorney Patterson opened the folder, and I saw Madison's hand tighten on her chair's armrest. Just slightly. Just enough to tell me she was starting to sense that something was wrong, that maybe the broken old woman she'd humiliated wasn't quite as powerless as she'd assumed. "Mrs. Chen?" The attorney looked at me for permission. I nodded once. And then I smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't vengeful. It was simply the smile of a woman who had spent 3 months preparing for this exact moment. The smile of someone who had learned long ago that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. "Show them," I said. Madison's face began to change as Attorney Patterson spread the first document across the table. The color drained from her cheeks, just a little, but enough. Derek leaned forward, squinting at the legal text, his mouth opening slightly. What is this?" Madison's voice cracked, just barely. I folded my hands more tightly together, feeling my husband's ring press against my chest. They had no idea what was coming. 6 years earlier, Richard and I had built our life together, one careful decision at a time. He'd started as a software engineer at Microsoft in the early 90s, and I'd worked as a translator for a non-profit serving immigrant families in the International District. Our house in Bellevue, a modest craftsman-style home we'd bought for a song in 1987, had appreciated beyond our wildest dreams as Seattle's tech boom transformed the region. But the real foundation of our life wasn't the house or the retirement accounts. It was something quieter, the garden I'd cultivated for 3 decades, the sewing room where I'd made Derek's Halloween costumes and prom outfits, the kitchen where Richard had perfected his Sunday dumplings, the reading nook where we'd spent countless evenings in comfortable silence. We'd raised Derek in that house. Watched him grow from a curious boy who brought home injured birds to a driven young man who'd followed his father into tech. We'd been so proud when he landed a position at Amazon. So hopeful when he met Madison at a company networking event. "She's ambitious," Richard had said after their first dinner together as a couple. We were washing dishes while Derek and Madison sat on the back deck, her laughter carrying through the screen door. But there's something hard, I'd finished quietly, handing him another plate. Like she's always calculating. Richard had looked at me with those warm brown eyes that had first captured my attention at a library study group 40 years earlier. Maybe we're being unfair. Derek seems happy. And he did seem happy, especially at first. Madison was beautiful, confident, successful. She worked in project management and talked about career trajectories and networking strategies with the intensity most people reserved for religion. Derek beamed whenever she praised his accomplishments, and wilted slightly whenever she pointed out areas where he could optimize his performance. The wedding had been grand. Madison's parents had insisted on paying for most of it, which meant Madison had insisted on controlling every detail. 200 guests at a waterfront venue, a live band, flowers I couldn't name. Richard and I had sat at our table feeling like spectators at someone else's celebration. "It's their day," Richard had whispered, squeezing my hand. "We just need to be happy for them." I'd tried. I'd really tried. The first year of their marriage, Derek and Madison had lived in a modern condo in South Lake Union. Madison had decorated it in that austere style popular in design magazines, all white surfaces and geometric art, nothing that looked lived in. She'd made it clear that our visits should be scheduled in advance and that unexpected drop-bys were boundaries being crossed. I'd learned to text before visiting my own son. Richard had taken it harder than I did. "I don't understand," he'd said one evening, sitting in his favorite chair with our orange tabby, Marrow, in his lap. "When I was young, my parents' door was always open. Family just came by." Different generation, I'd said, though the words felt hollow. Different expectations. What I didn't say, what I was only beginning to understand, was that Madison had started mapping out their future with the precision of a military campaign. And in her vision of that future, elderly in-laws taking up space and time were obstacles to be managed. The signs were subtle at first. Madison would sigh dramatically when Derek mentioned helping us with yard work. She'd make comments about aging parents becoming burdens during family dinners, then laugh like it was a joke. She'd forward articles about assisted living facilities to Derek with subject lines like something to think about for the future. Richard had started to get sick 3 years after their wedding. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, caught too late. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 9. Fighting the whole way, not because he was afraid of dying, but because he wasn't ready to leave me alone. "Promise me something," he'd whispered during one of his final lucid days. We were sitting in his hospital room, his hand paper-thin in mine. "Don't let them make you feel small, Grace. Don't let them take everything we built." "I promise," I'd said, not fully understanding what he meant. I'd found out soon enough. 3 months ago. Richard had been gone for 2 months when Madison showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning. No warning, no text, just her Range Rover pulling into the driveway at 8 a.m. while I was still in my bathrobe, feeding Marrow his breakfast. Grace. She didn't knock, just used the key Derek had given her for emergencies that apparently now included impromptu visits. "Oh good, you're awake. We need to talk." She breezed past me into the living room, her yoga outfit probably costing more than my monthly grocery budget, already pulling up something on her iPad. "Derek's in a meeting, but we've been doing a lot of thinking about your situation." "My situation," I repeated, setting down Mao's food bowl with hands that had started to shake slightly. "Your living situation," Madison clarified, perching on the arm of Richard's chair, the chair I still hadn't been able to sit in myself. "This house is way too much for you to maintain alone. The yard, the upkeep, those stairs to the second floor. And honestly, Grace, the property value has skyrocketed. You're sitting on almost $2 million in real estate that's just stagnant." I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, my bathrobe wrapped tight against a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Richard and I had a trust set up," I said carefully. "Everything was arranged. I was going to review it with the attorney next week." "Right, the trust." Madison's smile was bright and sharp. "Derek and I already reviewed it with our attorney. And here's the thing, Richard was so smart about this. He put the house in Derek's name years ago for tax purposes. The trust just formalized everything. So technically, this is already Derek's property. The floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. Technically, I echoed. Legally, Madison corrected, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with confused elderly relatives. Which means Derek, as the property owner, can make decisions about how it's used. And we've found this amazing assisted living community in Kirkland. I'm 63 years old, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't need assisted living. Well, independent senior living then. Madison waved her hand dismissively. The point is, Derek and I are starting a family soon. We need space. This house is perfect, close to his office, great school district, established neighborhood. And you'd be so much more comfortable somewhere that's actually designed for your needs. This is my home. This is Derek's house, Madison corrected, standing up. Her eyes had gone cold now, the fake concern melting away. And frankly, Grace, it's time to stop treating Derek like he's still your little boy. He's a grown man with a wife and responsibilities. He shouldn't have to support his mother indefinitely. Support, the word caught in my throat. I have my own income. My own savings. I'm not asking Derek to support me. But you're asking him to let you live rent-free in a $2 million property. Madison was already heading toward the door. Look, take a few days to process this. We're not heartless. But by the end of the month, we're going to need your decision about timing. The contractors need advance notice for the renovations we're planning. She left me standing there in my bathrobe, my husband's chair still slightly warm from where she'd sat, my whole world suddenly built on sand instead of the foundation I'd thought was solid. I called Derek that afternoon. He was apologetic but firm. Mom, I'm sorry Madison was so direct. You know how she is, she just cuts through to the practical stuff. But she's right about the property situation. Dad set it up this way to protect the asset. I thought you understood that. Your father set it up to protect me, I said, my voice steady despite the tears running down my face. To make sure I'd always have a home. And you will, Derek insisted. Just, not this specific house. Mom, we're trying to build our future. Why can't you see that this is what's best for everyone? Because everyone now meant Derek and Madison. Not me. Not anymore. The next few weeks were a nightmare dressed in polite language. Madison started showing up with designers and contractors, walking through my home with a measuring tape and paint swatches, talking about opening up the space and modernizing while I sat in the corner of my own living room like a ghost haunting her own life. She began sorting through things. These old textbooks can be donated. Nobody needs Chinese English dictionaries anymore, there's Google Translate. And this furniture is just dated. We'll get you some nice simple pieces for your new place. Assisted living, independent living, whatever, they usually come partially furnished anyway. I watched her pack up Richard's books, my sewing supplies, the framed photos of our life together all sorted into boxes labeled donate, trash, or storage. Please, I finally said, when she picked up a lacquered wooden box containing my mother's jade bracelet, the one piece of jewelry my mother had managed to bring from Guangzhou when she immigrated in 1962. Please, that's very precious to me. Madison opened it, held the bracelet up to the light, and shrugged. It's pretty, but it's not real jade. Maybe sentimental value? She tossed it in the donation box before I could respond. You'll thank me for helping you declutter. Elderly hoarding is a real problem. I wasn't hoarding. I was living. But Madison had made it clear, my life, my memories, my 37 years in this house, it was all just clutter in the way of her future. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my sewing room, my sanctuary, working on a quilt I'd been making from scraps of fabric that held memories. Derek's baby blanket. Richard's favorite shirt. My mother's old tablecloth. Madison burst in without knocking. This room is perfect for a nursery, she announced, already measuring the window for curtains. We'll need to clear all this out. I'm still using it, I said quietly, my hands frozen on the quilt. Using it for what? Grace, when was the last time you actually made something useful? Madison picked up my grandmother's vintage Singer sewing machine, the one my grandmother had brought to America in 1954, the one I'd learned to sew on as a child. This thing is ancient. It probably doesn't even work. It works perfectly. Please be careful. Madison set it down hard on the table. Too hard. I heard something crack inside the mechanism. See? It's already broken. You're holding on to junk, Grace. It's not healthy. She started grabbing armfuls of fabric, sorting them ruthlessly. Trash, trash, maybe keep, trash. Stop. My voice was louder than I'd intended. Please stop. Madison turned to me with exaggerated patience. Derek and I are trying to help you. But you're making this so difficult. Why can't you just accept that it's time to move on? I looked at her, really looked at her. At 29 years old, she'd already mastered the art of rewriting reality. In her mind, she was being generous. Accommodating. She was helping the confused old widow face inevitable change. In my mind, she was erasing me. I need to call Derek, I said, reaching for my phone. Derek already knows our plans. Madison's voice had gone sharp. He supports me 100%. You're his mother, Grace, but I'm his wife. And wives come first. She said it like it was a law of nature. An immutable truth. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Richard's last words, don't let them make you feel small. I'd already broken that promise. I felt smaller every day. The final humiliation came the following Tuesday. I'd been at my weekly grief support group, a circle of widows and widowers meeting at the community center, the one place where people understood that healing isn't linear, that missing your partner after 2 months is normal, not pathological. When I came home, I found my belongings scattered across the front yard. Not packed. Not boxed. Just thrown out. My sewing supplies were in a heap by the mailbox, fabric trampled into the wet grass from that morning's rain. My books were piled haphazardly near the curb. My mother's lacquered jewelry box lay on its side, the lid broken off, contents spilling out. Madison was standing on the front porch, hands on her hips, directing 2 young men in work uniforms. Just put it all out there, she was saying. If she wants to keep anything, she can sort through it. But honestly, most of it's trash anyway. I parked on the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Madison saw me and walked over to my car window, her expression somewhere between impatience and false concern. Grace, there you are. I texted you this morning. We moved up our renovation timeline, the contractors had a cancellation and could start today. So we're clearing out the unnecessary clutter. You threw my things in the yard, I heard myself say, my voice distant and strange. I'm helping you prepare for your move, Madison corrected. Derek told me you'd been dragging your feet on packing. So I'm handling it. You're welcome. I got out of the car and walked toward my mother's jewelry box. The jade bracelet was lying in a puddle. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and saw the crack running through it now, through the stone my grandmother had given my mother had given me, I'd planned to give to Derek's wife someday. Oh, that thing. Madison waved dismissively. I told you, it's not even real. You can get another one at Target. Something inside me went very quiet. Very still. I looked at my belongings scattered like garbage. At my sewing machine lying on its side, pieces of the mechanism visible through the cracked casing. At the books Richard had read aloud to Derek when he was a child, now warped from rainwater. I looked at Madison, standing in front of my house, standing where I'd stood to wave Richard off to work every morning, where I'd stood to welcome Derek home from school, where I'd stood on our wedding night when Richard carried me over the threshold. It's trash, Madison said, following my gaze. All of it. You've been living in the past, Grace. It's time to move forward. I carefully placed the broken bracelet in my pocket. Then I walked past Madison without a word, went inside my house, Derek's house, apparently, and up to the bedroom where Richard and I had spent 37 years of nights. I called my attorney. Mr. Patterson, I said when he answered. I need to schedule an appointment. Immediately. I have some documents I need you to review from my husband's estate. And I think there's been a misunderstanding about the property ownership. Of course, Mrs. Chen, he replied professionally. I actually have some concerns about the trust documents myself. How soon can you come in? Tomorrow, I said. First thing tomorrow. Mrs. Chen, he said carefully. Before we meet, I need to ask, do you have the original deed to the property? The one filed when you and Richard first purchased the house? I opened the fireproof box in my closet, the box Madison hadn't found yet because she hadn't bothered searching the master bedroom. Inside were decades of carefully organized documents, tax returns, insurance policies, and yes, the original deed. I have everything, I told him. Good, he said, and I heard something like relief in his voice. Because I think you're going to need it. That night, I slept downstairs on the couch, not because I'd given up the master bedroom but because I wanted to be near my things in the yard. At 2 a.m., I went outside with a flashlight and carefully gathered everything that mattered, sorting soaked fabric, collecting scattered buttons, cradling broken memories. Maro sat on the porch, his orange fur luminous in the porch light, watching me with the patient wisdom of a creature who understands that sometimes you have to hit bottom before you can push back up. By dawn, I had a pile of salvaged belongings in the garage and a plan taking shape in my mind. Madison had called my life trash. She had no idea what she'd just started. The meeting with Attorney Patterson changed everything. Mrs. Chen, he said, spreading documents across his conference room table. I need to ask you some direct questions about what you understood regarding your property ownership. I told him everything. About Madison's claims that the house was in Derek's name. About the trust Richard had supposedly set up. About my forced transition to assisted living. Patterson's jaw tightened as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Chen, did your husband ever discuss transferring the property deed into your son's name? He mentioned estate planning, I said slowly. Tax advantages. Making sure Derek would inherit smoothly. But he always said when we're gone. Both of us. He never said the house wasn't still ours. Patterson pulled out a document and slid it across the table. This is the current deed on file with King County. The property at 1847, Ashwood Lane is owned jointly by Grace Chen and Richard Chen. There's a transfer on death deed that would convey the property to Derek Chen upon the death of both owners, but he paused significantly. That transfer has not occurred because you are still alive. The room spun slightly. But Madison said, Derek said. They may have confused the trust provisions with actual property ownership, Patterson said carefully. Or they may have been deliberately misleading you. Your husband did set up a revocable living trust, but that trust was designed to avoid probate, not to transfer ownership while you're still living. You are the surviving trustee with full control of all trust assets, including the house. But Derek seemed so certain. Mrs. Chen. Patterson leaned forward. Did Derek ever show you legal documents proving ownership had transferred? Did you sign anything conveying your interest in the property? I thought back through the fog of grief, through the weeks after Richard's death when I could barely function. No, I finally said. I signed probate documents, but those were just standard estate things. Right. Correct. And in those documents, you're listed as the surviving spouse and primary beneficiary. He pulled out more papers. Your husband left you everything, the house, the investment accounts, his life insurance. Derek is named as a contingent beneficiary, meaning he inherits if you pass away. But you own it all right now, free and clear. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room. You own it all right now. Why would Derek think otherwise? I whispered. Patterson's expression was grim. That's a question you'll need to ask him. But Mrs. Chen, I need to be very direct with you. If your daughter-in-law has been making renovation decisions about a property she doesn't own, if she's been pressuring you to vacate a home you legally possess, if your son has been complicit in this, these are serious issues. I don't want to hurt Derek, I said quickly. He's my son. He's confused, or Madison has convinced him. Mrs. Chen. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. Your son is allowing his wife to throw your belongings in the yard of your own home. Confusion doesn't excuse that kind of treatment. I sat with that truth, feeling it settle into my bones. What do I do? I finally asked. First, We're going to send a formal letter to Derek and Madison clarifying the property ownership. Second, we're going to issue a cease and desist order preventing them from making any further changes or accessing the property without your permission. Third, he paused. We're going to prepare documentation for a meeting where we present all of this formally. They need to understand the legal reality of the situation. They'll be angry, I said. They'll be embarrassed, Patterson corrected. There's a difference. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked with Patterson to organize everything. We compiled property records, trust documents, financial statements. We found receipts showing that I had been paying the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance all from my accounts, my income. The house wasn't just legally mine, I'd been maintaining it entirely on my own. We also discovered something else. Madison and Derek had already taken out a home equity line of credit on a property they didn't actually own. They'd forged my signature on the application. This is fraud, Patterson said flatly. You could press criminal charges. I just want them out of my house, I said. I just want them to understand. They will, he promised. Meanwhile, I started reclaiming my life in small ways. I changed the locks on my house. When Madison showed up with her key and found it didn't work, I watched through the window as she called Derek in a fury. I didn't answer when Derek called me 17 times that evening. I texted him instead. All communication should go through my attorney, Patterson and Associates. I hired a company to repair my sewing machine. They said it would take weeks because the parts were vintage, hard to find. It's worth repairing though, the technician told me. They don't make them like this anymore. This machine has another 50 years in it, easy. Another 50 years. Longer than I'd probably live. But the idea of it lasting, of surviving, felt important. I took my mother's broken jade bracelet to a jeweler in the International District, an elderly man who'd known my mother decades ago. He held it gently, turning it in the light. Can be fixed, he said in Cantonese. The crack can be filled with gold, kintsugi, the Japanese call it. The repair becomes part of the beauty, part of the story. How long? I asked in the same language. 2 weeks. And it will be stronger than before. The places that break, when mended properly, they become the strongest parts. I thought about that a lot over those 6 weeks. About breaking and mending. About things getting stronger at the fracture lines. I also started documenting everything. Every text Madison sent. Every voicemail where Derek demanded I stop being difficult. Every contractor who showed up despite my clear instructions that no work was authorized. I kept a detailed journal, time-stamped, photographed. Patterson reviewed it during one of our weekly check-ins and nodded with satisfaction. This is excellent evidence. But Mrs. Chen, I have to ask, do you really want to do this? Confronting them this directly will fundamentally change your relationship with your son. It already changed, I said quietly. The day he let his wife call my life trash, it changed. I'm just making sure everyone understands the truth. The truth. Such a simple concept. Such a dangerous weapon. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I called old friends. Women from my translation work, colleagues from Richard's office, neighbors we'd grown distant from as we aged. I told them what had happened. Not for sympathy, though they offered it, but because I'd realized how isolated I'd become. How Madison had slowly cut me off from support systems, making me easier to control. My friend Lily came over one afternoon and helped me go through the salvaged items from the yard. You're stronger than you think, Grace, she said as we repaired a torn quilt together. But you don't have to do this alone. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Patterson. I had friends remembering I existed. I had the documents that proved my own reality. And I had one more thing, clarity. On a Friday evening, exactly 6 weeks after my first meeting with Patterson, I received a call from Madison. She'd been leaving increasingly hostile messages, but this one was different. Scared. Grace, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Derek is very upset. Please, let's meet and work this out like family. Family. She was using that word now. Now that she'd received the cease and desist letter. now that the bank had contacted them about the fraudulent HELOC application. "We will meet," I said calmly, "in Attorney Patterson's office next Tuesday at 2. I'll see you there." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in weeks. Marrow curled up on Richard's pillow, purring softly. I thought about the jewelry technician's words: the places that break, when mended properly, they become the strongest parts. I had broken. But I was mending. And I was about to show Madison and Derek exactly how strong broken things could become. The conference room at Patterson and Associates felt exactly as I remembered it from the opening scene: polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows, the filtered Seattle sunlight making everything look slightly surreal. Madison arrived in full armor, designer suit, perfect makeup, that confidence she wore like a weapon. Derek looked rumpled beside her, his tie slightly crooked, dark circles under his eyes. They'd been fighting, I could tell. The same way I used to be able to tell when he'd had a bad day at school just from how he opened the front door. "Mom." Derek tried to smile. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. I think there's been some confusion, and we just need to clear things up." Madison cut in before I could respond. "Grace, these legal threats are really unnecessary. We're family. We should be able to work this out privately." Her voice was smooth, but I caught the edge underneath, fear wrapped in irritation. "Please, sit down," Attorney Patterson said, gesturing to the chairs across from me. "They Saturday." Madison immediately pulled out her own iPad, ready to run the meeting as usual. "So, Derek and I have been reviewing our attorneys." "Actually," Patterson interrupted smoothly, "this meeting is about documents Mrs. Chen needs to share with you. So if you could set that aside for the moment." Madison's eyes narrowed, but she set down the iPad. "Fine. But let's be efficient. Derek and I have another appointment at 3. The contractor meeting for the main house renovations." "Of course." Patterson pulled out the thick folder, the same one from the opening scene, and placed it squarely in the center of the table. Madison glanced at it dismissively. Derek looked confused. "What additional documentation?" Madison asked, her voice taking on that patient tone again. "Derek and I already reviewed everything. The house is in Derek's name from the trust Richard set up. We've been very patient with Grace's transition period." There it was. That word again. Transition. I'd heard her use it so many times over the past months, always with that implication that I was transitioning out of my own life, making room for hers. "Mrs. Chen?" Patterson looked at me for permission, just as he had in the opening scene. I nodded once. And smiled. Madison's face began to change as Patterson spread the first document across the table, the current property deed, stamped and certified by King County. The one that showed Grace Chen and Richard Chen as joint owners, with a transfer on death provision that would only activate upon the death of both owners. The one that proved I still owned my home. What is this?" Madison's voice had lost its smoothness. She leaned forward, squinting at the legal text, her carefully applied foundation suddenly looking a bit too thick over her paling skin. "This is the current deed of record for the property at 1847, Ashwood Lane," Patterson said calmly. "As you can see, ownership remains with Grace Chen as the surviving spouse. The transfer on death deed Derek is named in only activates upon Mrs. Chen's death. But the trust," Derek started, his voice weak. "The trust," Patterson continued, placing another document on top of the first, "was a revocable living trust designed to avoid probate. Your father was very clear in his intentions. Mrs. Chen is the surviving trustee with full control of all trust assets, including the house, until her death. At which point, yes, ownership would transfer to you, Derek. But that transfer has not occurred." I watched my son's face as understanding slowly dawned. Confusion. Disbelief. Then something that looked like horror as he turned to Madison. You told me Dad put the house in my name years ago. You said you'd reviewed it with your attorney." Madison's mouth opened and closed. "We did review it. Our attorney said," he explained, "that the trust." "Did your attorney actually say the house was currently owned by Derek?" Patterson asked mildly. "Or did he say that Derek would inherit the house through the trust provisions?" Silence. Because those are very different things, Patterson continued. And based on the cease and desist order you received last week, I'm guessing you understood the distinction but chose to interpret it creatively. Madison's face had gone from pale to flushed. This is ridiculous. Derek is the heir. Grace is just being difficult about inevitable changes. Every estate attorney will tell you that sometimes aging parents need help making practical decisions. Mrs. Chen is 63 years old, Patterson said, his voice taking on an edge. She's fully mentally competent, physically active, and has been maintaining the property and paying all expenses from her own accounts for the past 2 months since your father's death, Derek. He pulled out more papers, receipts, bank statements, payment confirmations. A paper trail showing that I'd been the one keeping the house running while Madison planned her renovations. Furthermore, Patterson continued, there's the matter of the home equity line of credit. The one you two applied for using Mrs. Chen's property as collateral. Derek's face went completely white. What hellock? Madison, what is he talking about? Madison's hands clenched on the table. It was just, we needed capital for the renovations. We were going to pay it back before Mrs. Chen noticed that you'd forged her signature on the application. Patterson placed a photocopy of the hellock documents on the table, my forged signature circled in red. This is fraud, Mrs. Madison Chen. That's a criminal offense. The room went very quiet. Even the traffic noise from the street below seemed to fade. I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear. Madison, you threw my belongings in the yard and called them trash. You broke my sewing machine and my mother's jade bracelet. You tried to take my home while I was still grieving my husband. You called me a burden and told me my life was in the way of your future. Mom, Derek tried to interrupt. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You let her, Derek. You watched her dismantle our life, your father's and mine, piece by piece. You watched her throw my mother's jewelry in a donation box. You let her schedule contractors to renovate a house that isn't yours. You stood by while she tried to erase me. Tears were running down my face now, but my voice stayed steady. I thought you'd been confused. That Madison had convinced you the trust meant something it didn't. But you knew, didn't you? Some part of you knew that what you were doing was wrong. I thought, Derek's voice broke. She said we were helping you. That you couldn't handle the house alone. That you'd be happier somewhere smaller, simpler. I thought we were doing the right thing. By throwing my things in the yard. I asked softly. That was the right thing. He had no answer. Madison suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane. Grace, you're making Derek choose between his mother and his wife. Is that what you want? To destroy his marriage? I want, I said, to live in my home. The home Richard and I built together. The home I legally own. The home you tried to steal. Steal. Madison's voice hit a pitch I'd never heard from her. We were trying to help you. You're alone, you're old, you can't maintain a property like that forever. We were planning for everyone's future. You were planning for your future, I corrected. At the cost of my present. There's a difference. Patterson pulled out one more document. This is an order of protection Mrs. Chen is prepared to file if necessary. It would prevent both of you from accessing the property, contacting Mrs. Chen except through legal representation, or making any financial decisions involving her assets. He paused. It also includes documentation for potential fraud charges related to the hellock application. Derek looked like he might be sick. Mom, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. Madison and I will move out, we'll cancel the renovations, we'll. You don't live there, Derek, I said gently. You never did. You've been living in your condo in South Lake Union. Madison has been using my house as a staging ground for a future that she designed without ever asking what I wanted. What do you want? Madison demanded, her voice ragged now. You want to live alone in that big house forever. You want Derek to feel guilty every time he thinks about his inheritance. You want to punish us for trying to make practical plans. I thought about that question. What did I want? I want, I said slowly, to spend my remaining years in the home I love. I want to decide for myself when and if I need to move to a smaller space. I want to sew in my sewing room and read in my reading nook and tend the garden Richard and I planted together. I want my son to visit me because he wants to see his mother, not because he's calculating real estate value. And I want to be treated like a person, Madison. Not like trash. The silence that followed was absolute. Patterson straightened his papers. Here's what's going to happen. Mrs. Chen will retain full ownership and control of her property. The HELOC you fraudulently obtained will be cancelled, and you will be liable for any fees associated with that cancellation. You will cease all contact with Mrs. Chen except through written communication via this office. Any attempt to access, modify, or make decisions about Mrs. Chen's property or assets will result in immediate legal action, including criminal charges for the fraud. And if we don't agree? Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we proceed with filing all available charges and Mrs. Chen pursues a restraining order, Patterson said simply. Which would be a matter of public record. Very unfortunate for someone in Derek's professional position. I watched my son's face crumble. He looked like the little boy who'd come home crying when his science fair project fell apart, desperate for someone to fix it, to tell him it would be okay. But I wasn't going to fix this. He'd helped break it. He needed to help mend it. Derek, I said softly. I love you. I will always love you. But you need to understand what happened here. You need to understand that what Madison convinced you was helping me was actually hurting me. Destroying me. And you participated. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I wasn't thinking. You were thinking about your future, I said. And that's natural. But Derek, I'm still alive. My future matters too. Madison grabbed her iPad and stood up so abruptly her chair tipped backward. This is unbelievable. You're going to side with her against me, Derek? After everything I've done for your career, for our life. Derek looked between his mother and his wife, and for the first time in years, I saw something like clarity in his eyes. Madison, you forged my mother's signature. You threw her things in the yard. You called her memories trash. His voice was quiet but certain. Mom's not making me choose. You did. The moment you treated her that way. Madison's face went through a series of expressions, shock, rage, disbelief, before settling into cold fury. Fine. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've destroyed our marriage to protect your mother's pride. Don't expect me to be understanding when you can't afford the life we planned because you're waiting for an inheritance that apparently isn't coming anytime soon. She stormed out, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Derek stayed seated, his head in his hands. What do I do now? He whispered. That's up to you, I said gently. But Derek, whatever you do, you need to do it because it's right. Not because someone convinced you it's practical. He nodded slowly, then stood. Can I call you? Later. When I've figured some things out. Through my attorney, Patterson said firmly. Until we're certain the harassment has stopped. Derek flinched at the word harassment, but he didn't argue. He just nodded again and walked out, moving like a man decades older than his 31 years. When the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. How do you feel? Patterson asked. Tired, I admitted. And sad. But solid. Like I'm standing on ground that's actually ground. That's a good way to put it, he said. Mrs. Chen, you did the right thing. Not the easy thing. But the right thing. I thought about my mother's jade bracelet, being repaired with gold in the cracks. Kintsugi. Broken but mended. Stronger for having survived. Yes, I said. I think I did. The next 2 weeks were a strange combination of relief and grief. Derek sent one text, routed through Patterson's office. I'm staying at a hotel. Madison and I are separating. I need time to think. I'm so sorry, Mom. I cried when I read it, not tears of victory, but tears of loss. My son's marriage was falling apart, and even though Madison had been cruel, I hadn't wanted this. I just wanted respect. Boundaries. Recognition that I existed. But the separation wasn't my fault. It was the consequence of choices Derek and Madison had made, choices that had been building long before this confrontation. Madison's response came through her attorney, a venomous letter threatening countersuits, claiming elder abuse, me abusing Derek, somehow, and demanding that I pay for the cancelled renovations she'd scheduled. Patterson filed it away in a folder labeled baseless claims and assured me nothing would come of it. She's scrambling, he said during one of our follow-up meetings. Looking for any leverage. But she has none. The evidence is overwhelming, and she knows it. The real turning point came 2 weeks after the conference room confrontation, when Derek showed up at my door. He looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in his car. For a moment, I saw him at 17 again, the same lost expression he'd had when his girlfriend broke up with him right before prom. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I know I'm supposed to go through your attorney, but I needed to see you. To talk to you. Person to person, not lawyer to lawyer." I should have said no. Patterson had been clear about maintaining boundaries. But he was my son. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside. We sat in the living room, him in Richard's chair. He finally looked like he belonged there, in a way Madison never had, me on the couch with Marrow in my lap. "I've been trying to figure out how it happened," Derek said, his voice rough. "How I became the kind of person who'd let someone throw my mother's things in the yard. Who'd stand by while someone called your life trash." I waited, stroking Mao's soft fur. "Madison has this way of talking," he continued, "where everything is about optimization, efficiency, practical thinking. She'd say things like your mom doesn't need a 4-bedroom house, that's wasted square footage, or elderly people are happier with less maintenance. And somehow, when she said it, it sounded reasonable. Like we were being smart and forward-thinking. But in your heart," I said quietly, "you knew something was wrong." He nodded, tears spilling over. "The day she threw your stuff in the yard, I was at work. She sent me a photo and said she was helping you declutter. I looked at that picture, your sewing machine in the grass, your mom's jewelry box broken open, and I felt sick. But then Madison called and said you'd been resistant to change, that this was tough love, that you'd thank us eventually. And you believed her." "I wanted to," Derek admitted. "Because if I didn't believe her, then I had to admit what I was really doing. I was trying to inherit the house while you were still alive. I was trying to push you out so Madison and I could move into the life we wanted." He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "I was treating you like an obstacle, Mom. Like you were in the way of my future." The truth, spoken plainly. It hurt to hear, but it also felt necessary. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you want this house so badly?" "Madison wanted it," he said. "And I wanted to make Madison happy. Her parents are wealthy, they paid for the wedding, they helped with our condo down payment, they have all these expectations. She kept saying we needed to build equity, invest in real estate, position ourselves financially. The house was worth $2 million, and it was just sitting there with you living in it alone." "Just sitting there," I repeated. "With me living in it." He winced. "I know how that sounds. God, Mom, I know. But Madison made it sound like a practical business decision. Like we were managing family assets efficiently." He laughed bitterly. "She even had spreadsheets. Projections of what the house would be worth if we renovated and sold it in 5 years. She'd calculated everything except the part where it was your home." I thought about Madison, 29 years old, ambitious, treating my life like a line item in a budget. I should have hated her. But I mostly just felt sad for her, and for Derek, and for the marriage they'd built on efficiency instead of empathy. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Derek said. "Madison wants me to fight you. She has lawyers telling her we could make a case for, I don't even know, something about you being mentally diminished or unduly influenced. But Mom, I can't. I won't. What we did was wrong. What I did was wrong. What about your marriage?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think it's been over for a while. I just didn't want to see it. Madison loves the idea of me, the successful tech guy with good prospects and family assets. But I don't think she's ever loved me. The actual me." It was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in years. I'm sorry your marriage is ending, I said, and I meant it. Even if Madison was cruel, that's still a loss. Still painful. I'm sorry I let it get this far, Derek replied. I'm sorry I chose a marriage that was making me into someone I hated over protecting my own mother. Do you want to fix this? I asked. Our relationship. More than anything, he said immediately. But I don't know how. I don't know if you can forgive this. I looked at my son, my complicated, flawed, lost son who'd made terrible choices but was finally seeing them clearly. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, I said slowly. It's a process. You hurt me, Derek. Deeply. You need to understand that. But you're also still my son. And if you're genuinely sorry, if you're willing to do the work to rebuild trust, then yes. We can fix this. What do I need to do? First, you separate your life from Madison's completely. File for divorce, divide your assets, end that relationship. Not because I'm asking you to, but because you need to. For yourself. He nodded. Second, you start therapy. Real therapy, with someone who can help you understand how you got here. How you let someone turn you into a person who treats family like financial assets. Okay, he said. Third, I continued, you give me time. Space. You don't push for forgiveness or reconciliation on your timeline. You respect my boundaries while I heal. I can do that, Derek said. All of that. Whatever it takes, Mom. I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because I could see something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse. Not the performative apology Madison probably coached him through, but real, deep understanding of what he'd done. Derek, I said gently, you need to know something. Even if we fix our relationship, even if I eventually forgive you completely, things won't go back to the way they were. They can't. What happened changed us both. I know, he said. And that's okay. I don't deserve to have it go back to the way it was. I just want to be your son again. However that looks now. Marrow stretched in my lap, his purr rumbling against my legs. Outside, the Seattle rain had started, soft and steady, washing the world clean. Then let's start there, I said. Being my son again. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Derek left 20 minutes later, but before he did, he paused at the door and looked back at the living room, really looked at it, like he was seeing it for the first time in years. This is a beautiful home, he said quietly. I'd forgotten that. All I could see was real estate value and square footage. But this is where you and Dad built your life. Where you raised me. It has value that has nothing to do with money. Yes, I said. It does. After he left, I called Lily. Derek came by, I told her. I think maybe he's starting to understand. Are you going to forgive him? She asked. Eventually, I said. But not because he's my son. Because he's genuinely trying to change. There's a difference. Grace Chen, Lily said warmly, you've become a force of nature. I laughed. I've become someone who knows her own worth. That's different from being a force of nature. But maybe, I thought after I hung up, it was a little bit the same thing. Over the next month, things settled into a new pattern. Madison filed for divorce, demanding half of Derek's assets and claiming that his failure to support her life plans was a breach of their marital agreement. Derek's attorney, a woman I instantly liked, fierce and no-nonsense, countered with evidence of the fraud, the forged HELOC application, and Madison's documented harassment of me. The divorce, I heard through Derek's carefully worded emails, was not going to be amicable. Derek started therapy. He'd send brief updates through Patterson's office, started seeing Dr. Morrison. Had my first session. It was hard but good. And later, Dr. Morrison helped me see how I'd been prioritizing Madison's approval over my own values. Working on understanding how that happened. I started therapy too. Because even though I'd stood up for myself, even though I'd reclaimed my home and my dignity, I was still grieving. Still processing the betrayal. Still learning how to trust my son again. My therapist, Dr. Kwon, asked me one day, "What do you want from Derek now?" "I want him to understand what he did," I said. "Not just apologize, but genuinely understand how his actions affected me." And if he does, then I want a relationship with him. A real one, based on mutual respect. Not the old pattern where I make myself smaller so he feels bigger. That's a healthy boundary, Dr. Kwon said. And very different from revenge. I never wanted revenge, I told her. I just wanted to stop being erased. I also started reclaiming my life in other ways. I hired a contractor, a wonderful woman named Rosa, to make some updates to the house. Not Madison's cold, modern renovations, but gentle improvements that honored the home's history while making it more comfortable for my future. New appliances in the kitchen. A ramp for the back porch, thinking ahead, being practical without giving up my home. Fresh paint in colors Richard and I had always loved. I joined a quilting circle at the community center. Started volunteering at the immigrant support nonprofit where I used to work. Began teaching basic Cantonese classes for heritage language learners. My life expanded. Filled with purpose and connection and meaning. And then, 6 weeks after the conference room confrontation, I picked up my mother's jade bracelet from the jeweler. He handed it to me wrapped in silk, and when I unwrapped it, I gasped. The crack was still visible, but it was filled with veins of gold, intricate and beautiful. The repair wasn't trying to hide the damage. It was celebrating it. Showing that the bracelet had survived, had a story, had been made more precious by breaking and mending. Kintsugi, the jeweler said again. Beautiful, yes? Yes, I whispered. It's perfect. I wore it home, feeling the weight of it on my wrist. My mother's bracelet. My grandmother's bracelet. Now mine again, stronger than it had been before Madison broke it. That night, Derek called, through Patterson's office, following the rules. Mom, can I see you? Not at the house, I know I'm not ready for that yet. But maybe coffee? Somewhere public, wherever you're comfortable. I thought about it. 6 weeks of space. 6 weeks of Derek in therapy, of evidence that he was doing the work. Okay, I said. The coffee shop near Maidenbour Beach. Tomorrow at 10. Thank you, Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for giving me this chance. We met the next morning. Derek arrived early, already seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He'd ordered my usual, a small gesture that felt enormous. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said after we'd sat in awkward silence for a moment. Dr. Morrison asked me to write you a letter. Not to send, just for myself, to process. But I want to read it to you. If you're willing to hear it. Okay, I said. He pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, his hands shaking slightly. Dear Mom, he began. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who'd hurt you the way I did. Dr. Morrison says I need to take ownership of my choices instead of blaming Madison. So here's the truth, I knew what we were doing was wrong. When Madison started talking about moving you to assisted living, something inside me said this isn't right. But I ignored it because her plan was so clear, so certain, so efficient. And I'd learned to trust her certainty more than my own conscience. When she threw your things in the yard, I felt sick. But I convinced myself that you were being difficult, that you needed tough love to face reality. I made you the problem so I didn't have to admit that I was the problem. I chose Madison's approval over your well-being. I chose potential inheritance over present relationship. I chose convenience over character. I don't expect you to forgive me quickly or easily. I don't expect things to go back to normal. But I want you to know that I see what I did now. I see how I treated you like an obstacle instead of like my mother. I see how I let someone else's ambition become more important than your dignity. I'm divorcing Madison. Not because you asked me to, but because I finally see that our marriage was built on values I don't actually share. Efficiency isn't the same thing as ethics. Financial planning isn't the same thing as love. I want to be your son again. Not the version who tried to inherit your life while you were still living it, but the version you raised, the one who knows right from wrong. I want to earn back your trust. However long that takes. Whatever that requires. I love you, Mom. I never stopped. But love without respect isn't really love at all. I'm learning that. I'm trying to do better. Love, Derek. By the time he finished reading, we were both crying. That's a good start, I said softly. A really good start. Can I hug you? He asked. I thought about it. About boundaries and healing and the long road ahead. Yes, I said. But Derek, you need to know I'm not ready to have you at the house yet. I'm not ready to go back to Sunday dinners or holidays or the old routines. We're building something new. It's going to take time. I understand, he said. I'll wait. As long as it takes. He hugged me carefully, like I was something precious he'd almost lost and was terrified of breaking again. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was hugging my son. Not a stranger wearing his face. But Derek. My complicated, flawed, growing son. We talked for another hour. About his therapy, my therapy, his divorce proceedings. About the house and my plans for it. About his work, his life, his journey to becoming someone he could respect. As we were leaving, I stopped him. Derek, I want to show you something. I rolled up my sleeve and showed him the jade bracelet, the gold-filled cracks glowing in the morning light. Madison broke this, I said. Called it cheap trash. But I had it repaired using kintsugi, a Japanese technique where they fill the cracks with gold. The piece is more valuable now because of the repair. More beautiful because you can see its history. Derek looked at the bracelet, then at me. Is that possible for people too? I think so, I said. If both people are willing to do the work. The cracks don't disappear. But they can become something meaningful. Proof that something survived. I want to try, Derek said. To repair us. Even if the cracks always show. So do I said. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was hope. And sometimes, hope is enough to start with. 4 months later. I was in my sewing room, not someone's future nursery, finishing a quilt I'd been working on for weeks. The repaired Singer sewing machine hummed steadily, its vintage mechanism working perfectly now that the broken parts had been replaced with care. The quilt was made from memory fabric, pieces of Richard's shirts, scraps from Derek's childhood costumes, sections of tablecloths from family dinners, a square cut from the dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral. Not trash. Memories, stitched into something new. My phone rang. Derek. Hey Mom, he said. His voice was lighter these days. Younger, somehow. Are you free for lunch today? My treat. That Thai place you like. Lunch sounds nice, I said. We'd been doing this for the past 2 months, weekly lunches, neutral territory, rebuilding slowly. He didn't push. I didn't retreat. We met in the middle. Actually, Derek said, sounding nervous. I wanted to ask you something. And you can say no, it's completely fine if you're not ready. But I was wondering, could I come by the house after lunch? I've been in therapy for 4 months now, and Dr. Morrison thinks I need to see the house again. To really face what I almost destroyed. I thought about it. The house was mine again, truly mine. I'd established boundaries, reclaimed spaces, made it feel safe. But Derek had done the work too. The therapy, the divorce, finalized last month, ugly but over, the slow, steady effort to understand what he'd done. Yes, I said. You can come see the house. Really? He sounded stunned. Really? But Derek, you're visiting. Not moving in, not making plans for its future. Just visiting your mother in her home. Can you do that? Yes, he said immediately. Absolutely. That's all I want. We met for lunch at Bai Tong, the Thai restaurant where Richard and I used to celebrate anniversaries. Derek arrived with flowers, simple grocery store bouquet, nothing extravagant. Thoughtful without being performative. Over pad thai and green curry, he told me about his life. The new apartment he'd rented, modest, no pretense. The project at work that was challenging but exciting. The support group he joined for adult children working through family conflicts. Madison contacted me last week, he said carefully, watching my reaction. She wanted to have coffee. To process the end of their marriage, she said. Did you go? No. Derek's voice was firm. I told her that everything I needed to say, I'd said through my attorney. And that I was focused on other relationships now, ones I'd damaged and needed to repair. I felt something loosen in my chest. Pride, Maybe. Or relief. How did she react? She said I was being manipulated by you. That you'd turned me against her. That I'd regret choosing you over our financial future. He smiled sadly. I told her that if she thought being kind to my mother was manipulation, then she'd never understood me at all. That must have been hard, I said. Actually, it was easy, Derek replied. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. Because it was true. Because I'd finally figured out who I want to be. After lunch, we drove separately to the house. Derek parked on the street and walked slowly up the path, taking in the garden, which I'd been restoring, the fresh paint on the porch, the small ramp Rosa had built for the back entrance. It's beautiful, he said softly. I'd forgotten how beautiful it is. I unlocked the door and let him in. Derek stood in the entryway, looking around with eyes that seemed to be seeing everything for the first time. The photos on the walls. The worn spot on the floor where Richard used to pace while on phone calls. The reading nook with the window seat we'd built together. This isn't just a house, he said. It's your life. Your history. How did I not see that? Madison trained you to see assets instead of meaning, I said gently. But you're seeing clearly now. We walked through the rooms slowly. I showed him the updates I'd made, the new kitchen appliances, the refinished floors in the sewing room, the memorial shelf I'd created with photos of Richard, my parents, my grandmother. This is Grandma's bracelet, I said, pointing to where it sat in a small glass case. The one Madison broke. Derek looked at the gold-filled cracks and his eyes filled with tears. It's beautiful now. More beautiful than before. Yes, I agreed. Things that break don't have to be ruined. They can be transformed. We stood in my sewing room, and Derek looked at the quilt on the work table. What is this? Memory quilt, I said. Made from fabric that means something. Your baby blanket is in there. Your dad's favorite shirt. My mother's tablecloth. Derek traced the stitching with one finger. You kept all of this. Of course I kept it. This is my life, Derek. These pieces of fabric are pieces of our story. I almost threw away our story, he whispered. 4 square footage and equity and Madison's approval. But you didn't, I said firmly. You stopped yourself. You faced what you'd done. You're doing the work to change. That matters. We went out to the back deck, where Maro was sunning himself on the railing. Derek reached out carefully and scratched behind Mao's ears. The cat purred, stretching into the touch. I've missed this, Derek said. Just being here. Not planning or strategizing or optimizing. Just being. You're welcome here, I said. On my terms, respecting my boundaries. But you're welcome. Derek nodded. I don't deserve it. But I'm grateful for it. Derek. I waited until he looked at me. You're my son. What you did hurt me deeply. But you're still my son. And I've learned something through all of this. What? That love without boundaries isn't sustainable. That forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. That you can rebuild a relationship after betrayal, but it has to be a new relationship, not just patching over the old one. Is that what we're doing? Derek asked. Building something new? I think so, I said. And it's going to be better than what we had before. Because now we both understand what we're building. Not inheritance plans or future equity. But an honest relationship between 2 adults who respect each other. I want that, Derek said. So much. Then let's keep doing what we're doing, I said. Slow. Careful. Honest. As Derek was leaving, he paused at his car. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Dad would be proud of how you handled this? Or disappointed that I let him down? I thought about Richard. About his gentle strength, his quiet wisdom, his deep love for our son even when Derek frustrated him. I think, I said carefully, that your father would be heartbroken about what happened. But I also think he'd be proud of both of us right now. Me for standing up for myself. You for facing what you did and working to change. I miss him, Derek said, his voice breaking. So do I said. Every single day. Derek got in his car but rolled down the window. Same time next week. Same time next week, I confirmed. I watched him drive away, then went back inside. Maro followed me to the sewing room, where I sat down at the machine and continued work on the memory quilt. Each stitch was a meditation. Each seam a reminder. This fabric was Derek's baby blanket. This piece was Richard's work shirt. This square was my mother's dress. All of it damaged in some way, torn, stained, worn. All of it still precious. All of it still part of the story. 6 months after that, Derek and I were having Sunday dinner together at the house. Not every Sunday, I'd been clear about that boundary, but once a month, when we both felt ready. He'd brought groceries and was making dumplings using Richard's old recipe. His technique was rusty, but he was trying, focusing on the careful fold of dough that his father had taught him years ago. Dr. Morrison graduated me from weekly to bi-weekly therapy, he said, pinching a dumpling closed. She says I've made significant progress. But she also reminded me that personal growth isn't a destination, it's ongoing. Wise woman, I said. She asked me to think about what I learned from this whole situation, Derek continued. About what I want my life to be built on going forward. And connection, he said simply. Not achievement or acquisition or status. Just connection. With people I love. With work that matters. With values that are actually mine, not someone else's ambition. That's a good foundation, I said. We ate dinner on the back deck, watching the Seattle sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Maro curled up between us, purring his approval. I met someone, Derek said carefully. I'm not dating her or anything, I'm definitely not ready for that. But there's a woman in my support group. Her name is Allison. She's working through family stuff too. We've been getting coffee after meetings. Just as friends. What's she like? I asked. Kind, Derek said immediately. She's funny and smart, but the thing I notice most is how kind she is. To herself, to other people, to service workers and strangers. It's like, she leads with empathy instead of strategy. She sounds lovely. She is. And Mom, Derek looked at me seriously. If we ever do become more than friends, if I ever introduce you to another partner, you'll tell me if something feels wrong, right? You'll speak up if you see me falling into old patterns? Yes, I promised. I will. Because that's what love looks like, telling the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Thank you, Derek said. Later that night, after Derek had left, I sat in my reading nook with tea and looked around my home. My home. Not Derek's future property. Not Madison's renovation project. Mine. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, broken, grieving, being erased. I thought about the woman I was now, whole, healing, firmly planted in her own life. I'd almost let them take this from me. This house, these memories, this foundation. I'd almost believed Madison's narrative that I was a burden, that my life was in the way, that my time was over. But I'd fought back. Not with anger or revenge. With dignity and documentation and firm boundaries. And I'd won something more valuable than the house. I'd won myself back. I pulled out my journal, a habit Dr. Kwon had suggested, and wrote. Today I learned that empowerment isn't about defeating other people. It's about refusing to be defeated by them. It's about standing in your own truth even when everyone around you is telling a different story. Madison threw my things in the yard and called them trash. But I knew their value. I knew my value. And that knowledge, that absolute certainty that I deserved respect and dignity and space, was the most powerful weapon I could have wielded. I didn't destroy Madison and Derek. I simply revealed the truth, that I owned my own life. That was enough. The lesson I want to remember: you don't have to shrink yourself to make room for someone else's ambitions. You don't have to apologize for taking up space. You don't have to let other people define your worth or determine your future. You just have to know your truth. And stand in it. Even when you're standing alone. Especially when you're standing alone. 1 year later. I was in my garden, planting late-season vegetables, when Derek's car pulled up. He got out with Allison. They'd been officially dating for 3 months now, taking it slow, building something real. Mrs. Chen. Allison waved, carrying a basket. I brought plums from the farmer's market. Derek said they're your favorite. They are, I said warmly. Come in, both of you. I just made iced tea. We sat on the back deck, eating plums and talking about Alison's work. She was a social worker, Derek's promotion, he'd been made a team lead, and my newest project, teaching an online course on heritage language preservation. Your home is beautiful, Alison said, looking around. Derek told me about everything that happened. I just want you to know, I think you're incredibly strong. Thank you, I said. Though I prefer to think of it as being clear about my boundaries. That's a kind of strength, Alison said. She looked at Derek with obvious affection. Derek's told me a lot about what he learned from that time. About how he wants to be better. I appreciate that he's willing to be honest about his mistakes. Derek squeezed her hand. Hard to build something real on anything less than honesty. I watched them together, the gentle way they interacted, the obvious respect they had for each other, and felt grateful. Derek had learned. He'd really, genuinely learned. After they left, I went back to my garden. The tomatoes were thriving. The herbs were fragrant. The whole space was alive with growth, things breaking through soil, reaching for sun, becoming what they were meant to be. I thought about calling the garden mine versus calling the house Derek's future property. The language we use matters. The stories we tell about our lives shape those lives. Madison had tried to tell a story where I was a burden, an obstacle, a problem to be managed. I'd refused to accept that story. I'd written my own instead. And in my story, I wasn't the old widow making way for the next generation. I was Grace Chen, translator, quilter, teacher, widow, mother, woman. Still living. Still valuable. Still here. That evening, I finished the memory quilt. Every piece in place, every stitch secure. It was beautiful, not in spite of being made from damaged fabrics, but because of it. The imperfections were part of the design. The history was part of the art. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat in Richard's chair, my chair now, really. Marrow jumped into my lap, purring his ancient, knowing purr. We did it, I told him. We survived. Marrow blinked slowly, the cat equivalent of agreement. Through the window, I could see the Seattle skyline lit up against the evening sky. Somewhere out there, Madison was probably still plotting her next efficient life plan. Derek was probably having dinner with Alison, building something genuine and kind. And I was here. In my home. In my life. Exactly where I belonged. Epilogue, the lesson. If you told me a year ago that I'd find empowerment through documentation and legal clarity rather than dramatic confrontation, I wouldn't have believed you. I thought strength looked like anger, like fighting fire with fire. But I learned something different. Real strength looks like an elderly woman sitting calmly in a lawyer's office while her son and daughter-in-law realize they've underestimated her. Real strength looks like changing locks and drawing boundaries and saying no without guilt. Real strength looks like a jade bracelet repaired with gold, broken but mended, scarred but beautiful, survived and stronger for it. I didn't win because I was vengeful. I won because I knew my truth and refused to let anyone else rewrite it. To anyone reading this who's being told they're in the way, that their life is an inconvenience, that they need to make room for someone else's future, you don't. Your life is not a rough draft for someone else's final version. Your time is not over until you decide it is. Your worth is not determined by your utility to other people's plans. Stand in your truth. Protect your dignity. Draw your boundaries. And if someone throws your belongings in the yard and calls them trash, remember, the problem isn't the trash. It's that they couldn't see the treasure. I'm 64 years old now. I live alone in a house I love, in a life I've rebuilt from grief and betrayal. I quilt on Tuesdays, teach on Thursdays, garden on weekends. I have lunch with my son monthly, coffee with friends weekly, therapy bi-weekly. I am not a burden. I am not in the way. I am not trash. I am Grace Chen. And I showed them who's in charge, me, of my own life. That's the only authority that ever truly mattered.